What's up, everybody? Welcome into a new edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And know that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Speaking of going places, we got some places to go. Cam Smith with my man, Bulls CHSN insider, 𝗚cie Johnson. 𝗚cie, this is an emergency pod, man. And this is why 𝗚cie Johnson is one of the best in the business, everybody. You know, I say that all the time when he's on. I know when he hears me say that, he's like, come on, Cam, like you're putting too much on it. But 𝗚cie is fresh off the road after being with the Bulls on their 3-game trip. We had some major news drop before he hits and takes off on the runway. And we're like, 𝗚cie, me and my producer, 𝗚cie, like, 𝗚cie, do you think we can need to drop this emergency pod for the news that just dropped? And 𝗚cie's like, yeah, I'll be home in a certain amount of time. We can get it done. So shout out one to 𝗚cie for being able to do this, because we had to drop this emergency pod on the news that came out today from ESPN 𝗗cie𝗰𝗶𝗹 of the Bulls being involved in a 3-team deal that involved Zach LaVine. So a lot of particulars in that deal. I'm going to step out of that way because I'm going to let 𝗚cie Johnson do his thing. And 𝗚cie, as I said, is one of the best. But 𝗚cie, this is a deal and a player and a name that we've heard about for a couple of seasons, potentially being worked and shopped to be moved out of that Bulls uniform. And today we have that reality with Zach LaVine moving on from this Bulls team involved in that 3-team trade. He will now be a member of the Sacramento Kings.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure my wife and son know I'm home, but I'll go.
You know what, 𝗚cie, throw me under the bus, man. You know I say it was all Cam's idea. He was hell bent on doing this pod, all of that stuff. So just I got you. I'll sacrifice myself.
So I don't even know where you want to start with this one. I mean, obviously, first level is Zach LaVine reunited with DeMar DeRozan, and also going to the place where he signed an offer sheet in 2018. So close to 7 years later, he's finally going to Sacramento. But look, this is a significant moment in Bulls history. I mean, Zach LaVine is a 2-time All-Star and a max contract player, and was the face of the franchise for multiple seasons. So that's why we're on an emergency pod. This is significant.
Yeah.
I've been reporting for a while on our airwaves and our podcasts and our videos and our website and our app, wherever you want to get content. The Bulls are open for business and they're in sell mode. So I will emphasize one thing that I know for sure: they do not want to believe that they're done. That's not to say that they will consummate another trade, but they are trying. Obviously, attention focuses on 𝗏cije 𝗰𝗶𝗹 next. Whether or not they can get something done with him or something else remains to be seen. But they have other balls in the air between now and Thursday. I want to make that point up front.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I'll re-emphasize this, as 𝗚cie mentioned. He's been saying this all season, even before we got the season going, that the Bulls are open for business. And you're starting to see that with this Bulls team, and then making moves ahead of the February 6th trade deadline on Thursday. And 𝗚cie, immediately when I thought of, not even when I thought, but when I saw this deal happen, or at least it being reported on with Zach going to Sacramento, I'm like, wow, almost 7 years later, the Bulls and the Kings finally make that deal with Zach. As you mentioned, they signed Zach to an offer sheet back when he was a restricted free agent with the Chicago Bulls back in 2018. The Bulls, of course, matched it somewhere around, I believe, like mid-70 million, somewhere around that number, 78 million to be exact. So upper 70s with Zach. And so now you have a situation with this Bulls team where you not only get Zach off your books, but you bring in some pieces in terms of just some rotational guys. Zach Collins, a center. You bring in Tre Jones at the point guard position. Kevin Huerter, a shooter. Not sure on if they will see any time in the Bulls uniform, as again, the situation is still fluid for this team and they could possibly still be dealing. But in my opinion, looking at what the Bulls were able to get back, and one of the bigger things out of the names that I just named from what the Bulls are getting back from the Kings is they get that pick back from the San Antonio Spurs, which was top 10 protected. So I think that's a major, for my opinion, seeing what the situation was with the Bulls, that was a major get back for this team and 𝗏𝗏 𝗏𝗏.
Yeah, let's get into some of the specifics of this deal. There's, again, multiple layers you can look at this from. I mean, first of all, we should get into some minutia as far as news. Like, the Bulls need to create 2 roster spots for this trade to be finalized, which is why it has not been announced yet. I'm told that Chris Duarte and Torrey Craig are the likely candidates to be waived if they cannot be moved first. And I've also been told, and again, this is a fluid situation, so let's not read too much into it, but I'm told keep your eyes on Tre Jones, in the sense that maybe he might be on the move elsewhere. Now, he isn't expiring, So let's just see where that goes. I mean, I think Tre Jones is a starting level caliber player, but also the Bulls have plenty of guards, and they don't need. And that's not a knock on Tre Jones. I'm just saying they already are committed to 𝗬𝗪, Coby White, Josh Giddey. So let's just see where the Tre Jones situation, where that ends up. And again, they got to create the 2 roster spots. But Cam, you bring up a good point, and I'm already seeing some pushback on Twitter. Well, the Bulls could have guaranteed keeping that 2025 pick just by playing worse, so they could have achieved that anyway. But here's to me where and I don't want to give. I'm not big into like grading trades immediately. I think you got to wait and see how things play out. What I like about this trade are 2 things. It declares a direction. The Bulls are clearly taking a step backward, and they are moving. They started with DeRozan and Caruso, but they still stayed in the middle. Now they're totally going the other direction. They are going into a rebuild by trading Zach LaVine. But what's important to remember about the pick is, okay, let's say you just finished the year bad and didn't trade Zach and kept the top 10 protected pick to the Spurs this year. Then those protections move to next year. Next year's draft is considered just as good, if not better than this one. Now you have both those picks, the 2025 pick and the 2026 pick, guaranteed, unless some other deal comes along where one of them's included. But I don't foresee that happening. So this is a full rebuild, and now the focus shifts to like, how well can this front office draft? And they've had some hits and they've had some misses to this point. So, but that to me is where you do got to give them some credit. Like, they have now restored their first round order in terms of, they got 2025, they got 2026, they got 2027. They're done giving away first round picks as of now. So that's significant to me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, 𝗚cie. And, if you let, social media and the Twitter streets or X streets call it, that the Bulls, didn't get anything back, and it's a whole big thing with the Zach move, we're not going to give that any light. But again, to the point of this franchise clearly choosing a direction, and it's something that I said on the By the Horns podcast, is, look, if you're in a rebuild and that's the focus of going younger and trying to have the future pieces in place, you just got to rip that Band-Aid off and move it forward. And I think today was one of those moves with them saying, okay, if this is where we're going, we're ripping this Band-Aid off and we're looking to build with the future. And so I think that says a lot about this franchise in terms of the front office with AK and Mark Eversley, of where they want to go. And so you have pieces in place moving forward, and hopefully you look at that upcoming 2025 NBA draft and this Bulls team could land in one of those higher upper echelons picks. If it's a Derrick Rose situation, it would be great, where the Bulls didn't have a chance. They had like a 1.8% chance, I believe it was, to get the number 1 overall pick when Derrick Rose came into the draft in 2008, and they ended up getting the number 1 overall pick. If that works out that way, man, the basketball gods are looking out for the city of Chicago and this Bulls franchise. So you hope that you can get to one of those spots, but at least in the draft, that, again, we've talked about this, and so many have talked about just the depth of this upcoming draft. You're going to have pieces there, but then also I love that you brought up 2026 and that draft being strong as well. So I would advise people to kind of look at that, but then also how that pairs with what this Bulls attack could be looking forward to next year, because that's what it is. I mean, it's a rebuild. So I know people don't want to hear this. It's going to take time, but that's what happens with rebuilds.
Yeah, so we can already have some catchphrases: plant the flag, put an ace up your sleeve. I can already the draft lottery,
capture the flag or something like that.
The next big story is the draft lottery, but we'll wait for that for a little bit. But let's also some other significant things that I've got just jotted down here. This is the first in-season trade since the 𝗦cije 𝗰𝗶𝗹 trade in 2021. So close to 4 years later. And here's the thing about the Zach deal that I think we've kind of prepared our listeners for, but I think it needs to be reiterated here. The Bulls were never going to get an overwhelming return for Zach LaVine, and you can debate whether this is positive value or not, but it's not negative value. If anything else, it's neutral value to me. And you got to put it in this context. Last summer, when there were some trade discussions around Zach LaVine, all discussions focused on attaching an asset to Zach LaVine to get him off their books. They were going to have to attach. They had some preliminary talks with the Warriors, in which the Warriors said, "We'll take Zach, but you got to throw us a first-round pick." So the fact that they were able to consummate this trade or agree to the terms of this trade without attaching a first-round pick is significant. And again, preserve your first-round pick not only for this year but for next year. I don't love that they attached a second round pick in the future to this pick. And I have not gotten a good explanation as to why they had to do that.
Yeah.
You know, they've lost some negotiations in the margins before, and this to me would be another small example of that. And you can say second round picks aren't that important or whatever, but you know, Jalen Brunson would say otherwise. So would 𝗦cije𝗰𝗶𝗟. So would 𝗚cie𝗰𝗶. And then also a lot of NBA trades these days are greased with second round picks. So I don't love that. That's a small quibble overall.
Yeah.
I think, you know, if you're going to move Zach LaVine, and I was in the camp where I would not, I'm very well documented saying I would have built around Zach LaVine. So, but if you are going to move Zach LaVine, I have no problem with what they got. They got role players, kept their draft capital, first round draft capital, and clearly shifted this into a full rebuild.
Yeah, Casey, and that 2025 second round pick is going to the Kings, as you mentioned, from the Bulls. So I'm with you on that, because you try to find those gems, those hidden gems in the second round, and the Bulls found one of them, 𝗦cije𝗰𝗶𝗹. You named a couple other great names in Jalen Brunson, 𝗦tože 𝗶𝗶, guys that have obviously well exceeded that draft spot of where they were taken in their respective drafts. So you just never know, right? You just never know how things could pan out for certain guys and where you can find those diamonds in the rough. But just kind of taking it from the viewpoint of Zach's tenure as a Chicago Bull and his time in the city and what he's been able to do from a scoring standpoint, we can always touch on that, but just also just how he was able really to rebirth his career, because when he came from Minnesota, he was coming off of back-to-back dunk contest championships, and he wanted to shed that title of him just being a dunker, and of course he was coming off the ACL. And so I think Zach viewed his time, or his introduction to Chicago, as an opportunity to just change the narrative around his name as a basketball player. And I think he did just that, just with so many great moments, especially scoring the basketball. And you can look at the number of, records and, names that he's placed himself against and attached himself to. You can say that he's definitely been one of the better Bulls that we've seen in the franchise history.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you shifted to Zach, because I also wanted to say on a personal level, and I'll get into the basketball sim, but on a personal level, I just want to say, he was as classy and as professional as they come. He definitely had a blip last season where he wasn't in a good mood. He was tired of being in trade rumors. He wasn't healthy, and actually played through a floating bone in his foot that was undiagnosed early in the season. And then obviously eventually opted for surgery. So that was the one blip on an otherwise stellar and unblemished tenure here. I always say, when he first came here, he was the face of the franchise when they're getting their hats handed to him a lot in that initial rebuild when he first came after the Jimmy Butler trade, and was always available, always willing to speak after losses. I personally had a great relationship with Zach, and I will miss covering him. But he represented this franchise with a lot of class and a lot of professionalism. And I think, again, I'll get into basketball in a second, but I think this season was also really cool for Bulls fans to see him exit, not only playing at an extremely high level on the court again, but really comporting himself off the court with the Zach that we knew. He kind of reclaimed that narrative right from the start on media day. Talked openly about how fatherhood had changed him. And, obviously was on this personal leave here as they welcomed another one of their families. So just a class guy, and I'm going to miss covering him. But from a basketball standpoint, he is a significant Bull. I mean, he's up there in terms of scoring efficiency and offensive records in those conversations with Bob Love and, well behind MJ, but on that all-time list, with those three interchangeable. Well, Michael's always number one, but Zach battling, with Bob Love for 2 and 3, and two-time All-Star, and was the Bulls' first All-Star in a long time when he got that first bid. And as you said, flourished and became more than just an athletic dunker, and really became one of the more efficient three-level scorers that this city has seen in a long, long time. I mean, his shooting splits this year are ridiculous. I mean, he's shooting 45% from three on high volume. That's insane. So wish him the best of luck in Sacramento. We'll look forward to seeing him out there in March when we go out there. And he will be missed from a media standpoint. And I know he'll be missed by the coaching staff from an offensive standpoint.
Yeah, it definitely made life a lot easier for his teammates on the court and the coaching staff on the sidelines, just because he just could make tough shots and just turn it on when he needed to and when the team needed him to do that. We saw that in so many different instances this season, but also during his time as a member of the Bulls. But I agree with you, Casey. Just his professionalism and his class is one of the things for me, or a couple of things for me, that stand out with Zach, just off the court in his time with media and making sure that he wasn't giving you stock answers, right? I mean, he was going to give it to you genuinely and be critical of himself as well when he would have performances that didn't meet his standards. So you always appreciate that. I'm sure that you appreciate that, and I appreciate that as well when you have those conversations with him. And even thinking back to Media Day when I was sitting down with him one-on-one for CHSN and just our conversation, and before we even spoke any words, just his body language, his body positioning. He was kind of leaned back on the chair, just arm kind of hanging off the chair, because I know he was tired of the questions of where he was physically, where he was mentally, how ready is he to come into the season to prove, or, you know, in the outside world's view of get more respect put back on his name or have that respect put back on his name. But Zach was just like, you know what? Hey, I know who I am in this league. I'm just going to go out and do what I do, and that's be one of the better elite scorers in the NBA. And so I love that conversation that we had, because, again, he was just genuine with his answers, but he was just a guy that was ready to prove that, hey, I'm still the same guy before the injury, and you're going to see that. And we also saw the growth of him just as a scorer, as a player, too. I think that's one of the things for me that stood out from Zach in his time with the Chicago Bulls this season, is that you saw maturity. You saw him at peace, both on and off the court. And I think for a lot of Bulls fans, they needed to see that, just how he grew as a player in his NBA career, and as his time as the Chicago Bulls. So we're definitely wishing him the best, and congratulations to Zach and his wife and his family for baby number 3. And so I can understand just, you know, the whole shift in that, Casey, of, you know, not having to go to Sacramento and you got a new baby, and, you know, that's just the personal side of the NBA and life off the court. But I'm sure he's going to handle it with grace and class and professionalism, especially when he gets out to Sacramento. And he's also reunited with a former teammate in DeMar DeRozan. So the Zach and DeMar show is back on the court together, and it's going to be on the West Coast now.
Yeah, I guess DeMar already weighed in on Instagram. I guess I was fine, so I didn't fully see it, but I know he sits on like Reunited or something like that. We should also quickly get into just who's coming to the Bulls, because we got into Tre Jones a little bit. Yeah. You know, I actually think he's a pretty solid player. He's had a couple really strong years with San Antonio, but I just think it's a crowded guard picture he's entering. But let's focus on Huerter and Collins, because Huerter, to me, he can be a reclamation project, and both these guys will be here beyond this season. You know, Jones is expiring, but Huerter and Collins both have another year on their deals. Yeah. And Huerter, you know, at one point to me was one of the better shooters in the league. He's kind of lost his thread a little bit, so maybe a change of scenery can ignite him again. I think he's shooting it a little bit better this year. I haven't had a chance to look at his stats yet. But, you know, obviously the Bulls like getting up a lot of threes. He's a three-point shooter, so he'll fit in probably into the forward rotation. And then Collins, you know, he's had ups and downs throughout his career. He's had some injuries, but Bulls are thin in the front court. So do you take a look at him, or do you know, keep riding the Patrick Williams combination? Probably lean toward the latter, but, you know, I'm assuming he'll get some spot minutes here and there to get a chance to see what he can do. But both those guys are signed through next season, so they're important to kind of put in context of where they fit for now.
Yeah, I'm with you, especially with Huerter being a shooter and being able to stretch the floor. Obviously, his time in Atlanta, where he was drafted, coming out of Maryland, was, you know, his MO was a guy that could stretch the floor and knock down shots. But then also, as his game evolved when he went to Sacramento, more so the past couple of seasons with his Kings team, and going back to the season where they made the playoffs and broke that, you know, 16-year history drought of them not making the playoffs. You saw Huerter knocking down shots from the perimeter, but then also taking guys off the dribble. So he has a couple of layers to his game that will help the Bulls offensively. And Zach Collins is a guy that, as you mentioned, in the front court can help there, but brings a certain nastiness to him. And that's something I've always respected about Zach Collins, even during his high school career and him going to Gonzaga, is that, like, he's a dude that's not going to back down. And I know listeners and viewers right now are saying, Cam, it's the NBA, you shouldn't back down. But it's a different level to it, where it's like if you go after one of Zach Collins' teammates, then he's going to make sure that he responds. And so you need sometimes guys like that can bring some type of physicality and just some type of resistance with that. So those two guys, for sure, as you mentioned, another year left on their deal for sure can help aid the Bulls in situations where they could be lacking, KC.
Yeah. Huerter's 2026, I just looked up. That's shocking to me because it feels like he's been in the league a long time. And I misspoke because I said I thought he was shooting a little bit better this year. He's at 30% from three. And he shot 40% from three just 2 seasons ago on 6.8 attempts per game in 22-23. I mean, that dude, and he shot 39% the year before on 5.6 attempts. So I don't know what's happened to him, but his shot has not had the same impact as it was the last couple of seasons. And, sometimes those change of sceneries can help guys. I mean, he's a career 37.5% 3-point shooter, but he's at 30% this season. So if he's going to play, he's going to have to step that up because the Bulls have got a lot of good 3-point shooters this season out of nowhere, man. So.
Well, KC, Billy Donovan is not going to tell Kevin Huerter to stop shooting because he's going to say, hey, this is what we do. We need to get up 3-point attempts. And so, as you mentioned, maybe that change of scenery can help Huerter. So just like to throw in another piece, one of the bigger pieces of this 3-team deal for people that want more context, because I want to mention that De'Aaron Fox was the piece for the Sacramento Kings that they moved off of and that involved in that 3-team deal and sent him to the San Antonio Spurs. So that creates an interesting combo, but then also team aspect with De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama and them not having to give up some of their core pieces and young pieces like Keldon Johnson or Devin Vassell or Jeremy Sochan. So San Antonio is trying to make a push, KC, towards a possible play-in spot. I'm not going to go as far as to say play-off spot in the West because we know how tough the West is, but you never know. But you're adding one of the more dynamic guards at the point guard position in De'Aaron Fox with Victor Wembanyama, and we already know that Wemby's a cheat code.
Oh, I'm glad you just used that phrase. That's exactly what I was going to comment. I saw some highlights package circulated on Twitter recently of him just from one game where my jaw was open. I mean, the dude is just going to another level this year. I mean, I've had, some people that I talked to within the league that speculate that he's going to be the best player in the league in 1 or 2 seasons. I mean, he's on that trajectory. So yeah, I've always liked De'Aaron Fox's game, and I can see him pairing with Wemby pretty nicely for a long time. So San Antonio's always, got big designs, and this is the latest one. And in Sacramento, I thought did well in this trade. They got a lot of draft capital, 3 firsts, 3 seconds. The firsts are varying degrees of power, but they're still draft capital. So. This was a team where this was a trade where you actually can look at it and go, you know what, that makes sense for all 3 of those teams.
Right.
I'm not big into, grade them right away because you got to wait and see how it plays out. I mean, maybe Kevin Huerter comes here and starts shooting 40% from 3 again. I mean, you don't know. But you can understand why each team made the deal. And again, I think it's one that makes sense for all 3 teams. But I'm excited to see Fox with Wemby. That's going to be fun.
And then also Fox being able to learn from one of the best point guards of all time in Chris Paul. So you have that dynamic, and of course with Greg Popovich. So it's a great situation for De'Aaron Fox. And, he's looking forward to going up against the Kings. You got to look back at the schedule to see when San Antonio and Sacramento match up again before the season is done, especially if they go back to Sacramento. Fox is for sure looking to put on a show against his former team. But it's been a lot going on trade deadline wise, KC, as we get closer to that date. And it's February 6th on Thursday. And as you mentioned, you're not a fan of grading trades right away because you want to see just how things marinate, how things happen with certain players with these new destinations and situations. Obviously, yesterday, the massive trade that a lot of people didn't think was real with Luka Doncic being traded to the Lakers for Anthony Davis and a lot of other pieces. It just kind of caught me off guard as I was getting ready to wind down my night. So that energy from yesterday transfers into today. And of course, we are still a few days from the actual deadline expiring, but you can definitely see me, Casey Johnson, Jason Goff, and Kendall Gill on Thursday on CHSN at 2 p.m. for our trade deadline special. You do not want to miss it. We'll be with you for an hour. And the Bulls are still going to be open for business, I'm sure, KC, and we could see some possible moves, additional moves from this front office with the rest of this roster, because it feels like if I'm 𝗏cije Vucevic, that if I see Zach being moved, do you try to – I'm not trying to have you think for Nikola, but it's like, all right, well, when is my time coming? Am I being moved before this deadline is up?
Well, I can speak to that because I've talked to Vooch directly and openly about this. I mean, that's the kind of great. He's a great interview, and that's the kind of relationship I have with him, and the respect he has for us. It's not, and I'm just not. It's not just me who's had this conversation with him. Other writers that cover the team regularly have had this conversation with him. I mean, I can tell you exactly what Vooch's mindset is. He knows if he is dealt, it's going to be to a team that's got win now aspirations, and he's cool with that.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on the back end of his career. He's got this contract's through next year. He's certainly going to sign one more deal after that. But after that, that might be it. So, but if he's not dealt, I mean, he re-signed here for a reason. He likes being in Chicago. His family likes being in Chicago. He fits this style. He's comfortable with the coaching staff. So he's a professional. He'd be fine if he stayed here. Now, if he's traded, knows he's going to be on a team that's trying to make a playoff push. So he'd be good with that. Yeah, I mean, we were talking to him about it today, post-game, earlier today after the Detroit game, about the doncic trade, and does that make his mind think that, anything can happen and he could be next? And this was before the Zach trade, obviously, but he's ready for anything. He's a professional. I think the big thing that's always helped this locker room is, both Zach and Vooch have been traded before, so they were really kind of entering this week and this period with professionalism and business of basketball well understood. So, Vooch is going to be fine with whatever happens. And, one option that I was told was dead was the Lakers. But with this Doncic trade, they certainly are in the market for a starting center. I do think starting centers with some defensive mindedness might make more sense for them, whether that be like a Robert Williams III or Valanciunas, who's obviously aging, but he does offer rim protection. I've heard mixed things on Walker Kessler being available or not available, but if he was available, that'd be a defensive-minded center. And maybe the Lakers just think, hey, we've made one seismic trade. Let's just see how things settle down. Although I don't know who's playing the five for them. Is it Jackson?
Yeah.
I don't even know. So anyway, stay tuned on Vooch, but I do know, again, the Bulls are trying to do more, and Vooch is the likely next domino to fall if they are able to pull something off.
All right, there it is. Look, put those 𝗚cie Johnson alerts on your phone, because he's going to be always tapped in and giving the news in terms of what's going to happen with this Bulls roster.
Even from a runway.
Look, 𝗚cie is always on it, man. And so that's why we have to shut things down right now, because, again, I already told him I was going to sacrifice myself. If he, gets word from his wife and his kids, it's like, okay, we didn't even know you're home. Then just throw Cam on the bus. Cam wanted to do this emergency pod because Cam is just crazy like that. But 𝗚cie, we appreciate the insight, man, for sure, making time for the By the Horns podcast, for this emergency pod on the trading of Zach LaVine to the Sacramento Kings. The Bulls get Zach Collins, Kevin Huerter, and Tre Jones back in return, and also get their top 10 pick from the San Antonio Spurs. They control that, so they don't have to worry about any situations where, the integrity of competition and all that stuff is in the wings. They can rest a little bit easier knowing that they have that back in their control. And again, as I mentioned, on Thursday, 2 p.m., CHSN, K.C. Johnson, Jason Goff, Kendall Gill, and myself will be with you for an hour. We're going to tap into everything that's happened during the NBA trade deadline and some moves that are going to happen right up until the trade deadline. So we'll have everything covered, especially with the Chicago Bulls team. So we appreciate everybody tapping into this emergency pod on the By the Horns. And know the By the Horns is presented by Toyota, and Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. We'll see everybody soon. Take care.